Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending what time you're watching this. Today we're going to talk about confronting ourselves as cultural beings, and I'm going to draw quite a bit on the work of Teresa McDowell's from her book on applying critical social theories to family therapy practice. And yeah, let's jump on in. So take a few seconds and think about these questions, the questions that some of you have already written about and been thinking about already. But where did you grow up? And what did your neighborhood look like? And who was there and who wasn't? Um, Sit with that for a while. Continue to think about that. I also think this could be a good journal prompt. So if you're a journaler, maybe you can journal a little bit more about these things. So we're all cultural beings. It's we're not absent a context. We emerged from a context, and that context influenced who we are and what we do and what we do not do. So we're not blank slates as therapists. And every session that we're entering is shaped by our race, our ethnicity, and our national origin, class and gender, sexual orientation, the geography where we grew up. There are many different forces that were acting on that. And then there's also our family history and our generational story, the time period that in which we were born. So this shapes our worldviews, our values, and the questions that we even think to ask as therapists, or the ones that never come to our minds. One of the reasons I like to ask folks, if I'm working with someone who's coming from a different social location, I might ask what someone from their social location might think to ask that I'm not thinking about asking. Some of the variables we could consider is positionality. Our social location shapes what we see and what we know and the assumptions that we make, and what we're born into these, and we're born into the stories that are embedded into those. And it's not a singular thing. There's intersectionality. Multiple identities interact and compound to shape our lived experience. So yeah, our gender is influenced by our race, our ideas around nationality are influenced by our social class, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So worldview, the lens through which we interpret behavior, relationships, and pathology. The main task, I would say, or the main call from some of the things that we've been talking about and from some of the things we've been reading, particularly in our primary textbook, is to become more conscious of it. Which is hard. It's hard to become conscious of what we're unconscious of, but it's a lifelong work for a therapist to be engaged in. So space shapes who we are. So time and space and social interactions are all primarily in the construction of our identities, are all primary in the construction of our identities and the material realities of our lives. Thinking about my own training, thinking about the training that I provided over the decades, family therapy is often traditionally privileged time. We look at history, we do genograms, we do life maps. We tend to focus more on that than we do on space. So critical geography asks, what might we see differently if space mattered as much as time? Doesn't mean I want to replace time, because I think there's some really powerful things that come from genograms and from other techniques. But let's also look at space. So within social space, we learn, we internalize, and embody shared values, beliefs, and class distinctions. It's not neutral. It's organized by power, shaped by race, class, and gender and nationality. I'll talk a little bit about some of my own experiences with this, and the ways that power has been a factor. And there's some of this chapter and some of the other things I've talked a little bit more about nationality, but I always just plug it in there because one of the things I pay attention to is how often it's not on lists. And yeah, so I plug that in. So the power of place. For example, if we were to talk about economic power, with economics, it means often secure, spacious housing, room for individual expression and privacy, safe, quiet neighborhoods, a sense of agency and independence, access to clean air, good schools, parks, protection from unwanted surveillance. Um, I'm trying to think. I just saw today someone talking about It was just something came across on social media. It was an actress who was studying accounting. Later, I'll think of who it was. An actress who was studying accounting, and she ended up being a stand-up comedian. Um, and in the interview, she said, "You know, I could never. I had to think first about how am I going to pay the bills, and so I didn't have space to dream." And so once she became financially okay through being an accountant, then she could dream and go, and then start to explore, and that she could do things that don't pay, like internships and other things. Anyways, there's uh, a lot of benefits that come with economic means. And if you think about the others, there's on low income, it's often characterized by crowded shared spaces or limited privacy, the intrusion of landlords, noise, neighbors, limited freedom of movement and choice, safety concerns, high pollution exposure, higher rates of mental illness and hospitalization, and less access to treatment, and then more routine state surveillance. So when we're in the therapy room, we got to be thinking about this at all points, like the assignments that we give. Like maybe we prescribe going for a mental health walk. Well, do they have safety to go for a mental health walk? Do they have childcare so that they can have that privilege? And it goes on and on. But we might be just thinking like, oh, okay, this is what I think would be helpful, but we're not realizing that the intervention strategies that we're considering might be coming from a place of privilege. So, yeah, it's important to be thinking about that. Um, Mobility, segregation, surveillance. So the freedom to move is unequally distributed by class, race, gender, and national origin. Um, think about some of the examples of people who do you feel safe going for a walk in a neighborhood, and would others maybe feel less safe in the same space? Greater mobility, greater access to education, jobs, family networks, and therapy. Um, I was asked a taxi driver friend of mine what he thought about therapy, and he says, "Well, that's something for rich people. You know, I've got to work. Um, not everyone. Uh, Transportation. I'll just think about all the barriers to going to therapy: transportation, childcare, etc. So, lack of mobility is potentially is potential is rarely named as a privilege or as an experience of oppression. Segregation, a spatial force protecting the status quo. Historically, black codes, redlining, housing covenants, all these barriers that are not in the consciousness of someone who doesn't face those barriers. Contemporary effects like mental health outcomes, wealth gaps, limited access to services, etc. And then we don't talk a lot about surveillance, but some of us might never expect to be that we're being surveyed, and others have lived with that their whole lives. Those with less power are often watched more closely. Welfare families face routine state inspections of homes, for example, and finances and their daily lives. In therapy, clients might experience the therapist as an extension of sort of the surveillance apparatus. And in fairness, they often have been. Most therapists, myself included, have had times where we have had someone sent to us, and then there's a process where we're being asked to return and report on their progress. That is less likely to happen with someone who is of a high wealth status and of a low wealth status. A lot of times we can think about the concept of borderlands. So borderlands are spaces of complexity and strain where groups contend and where new identities are forged. There's identity borders, bi, pan, queer identities. They often live between binary categories. And I want you to think about this as that it could be something that gives unique perspective and understanding and an ability to handle complexity. So it can be generative, but it's also it can be very isolating. Uh, Another example, biracial clients often describe not fitting anywhere, the borderland as both a burden and as a source of unique resilience. Transnational families, ones that transverse economic, political, and cultural borders in ways that must be central to therapy. I've thought about like refugees and asylum seekers and others who maybe there are children who have grown up in camps where they are moving across space. And you can imagine how difficult the difficulties they might face in accessing mental health care. And then it's something to be thinking about with borderlands and resistance. So where is the oppression? Wherever there is an oppression, there's resisting. So many things that get labeled as acting out, depression or withdrawal might actually be forms of resistance and not pathology. And think clinically, this could show up in lots of different ways. Like maybe refusing to be engaged in sexual activity with a partner. Um, Maybe that is a sign of resistance to things that are going on in the relationship. So let's be careful about removing a symptom without understanding in what context it's making sense. So the addressing framework. Uh, some of the things to be thinking about is we kind of map out. We can do this for ourselves, and then we can do versions of this also with the folks that we are working with. We can look at age and generational influences, developmental disabilities, or a disability that's acquired later in life, the religion or spiritual orientation, ethnicity or racial identity. Um, and then social economic status, sexual orientation, indigenous heritage, national origin, gender, and there's probably many, many, many other things that we haven't thought to think about yet that could also be listed here. Um, One of the things that has happened in my lifetime is I've seen a movement that has gone from the idea of cultural competence. Like there was a whole competency movement actually at the very beginning. My dissertation was on competence. Uh, but the language has changed because critiques have come up about it. So when you think about cultural competence, it was often framed as more of a destination to arrive at, mastery of knowing about another culture. I think about some of the I won't name names, but some of the core books that we've used were about really studying about another's cultures, but there's at the risk that we think we understand it and we know it as if it's a monolith. Clinicians as experts, a checklist of cultural facts that we would check out as therapists. Um, and it was more individual in its focus. I would like to say that it was a step. I think it was an important step that people, I mean, and I think in different regions of the world, um, most therapists are not even trained to be thinking about these issues. And so I think it was an important step. Then it was critiqued for some of those things, and cultural humility is currently the new language that is being used, which is more of a lifelong process of learning, an openness to not knowing, the client being the expert of their own experience, a process of ongoing reflection and critique, and it includes institutional accountability and isn't as individual focused. Now, I predict within many of your career lives, they'll arrive valid, important critiques of this concept, and we will build upon it. So yes, it needed the critique is valid, and you know part of this idea is that ongoing reflection and critique is important for us as a field as well. One of the things that you all have been engaging in is doing sort of a family cartography where you're sort of mapping out some of these things. Um, and what is important about that is it's trying to make it visible, things like power and privilege as they play out spatially, sites of oppression and acts of resistance, geography, safety, privacy, mobility, and resilience born from place. And yeah, some of the guiding questions that you could consider are posted here. Yeah, I've really enjoyed looking at some of the things that you're doing, some of the real insights that you shared about it. Um, and yeah, I thought it was really powerful how you all are locating yourselves and thinking about the ways that they influence you. And for every one of us, every one of you, and myself as well, there are blind spots. That's the thing that I'm most interested in. Like, again, how do we become conscious of what we're not conscious of, so we could think about the impact of it? And my little pet one is that I don't find very many people in the United States have really sat down and thought, how does my existing in the United States influence my thinking? And it's not just about the politics, not just about the current situations in the United States, but in the cultural air of the United States, what gets privileged, what doesn't. Um, and then, I think it's helpful for people to get outside and get a perspective. Again, that's a privileged possibility, but yeah, to try to find some way where you can become conscious of the water that you're swimming in. I just talk. I've shared a little bit about this already, but the space that I emerged from. I was born in a small town outside of Salt Lake City in Utah in the 1970s. I still do a little bit of time, and then it was a very conservative Mormon community in Utah where I saw I knew everyone around my block. I still could walk and tell you who lived in what house during my childhood, and I could tell you who was the non-Mormons, and they were the people that I just actually didn't have many interactions with, whereas all the other people I saw at church, at barbecues, at scout camp, and at the congregation campouts, etc., etc. And I remember in my school, there was not very much diversity. There was maybe two or three Catholics that I can think of, two or three, non-Mormons. I think there was about three Latinos that I could name. There was no black students in my school. I remember a few foreign exchange students over the years. So it wasn't particularly racially diverse, religiously diverse, um, and not diverse in many other ways. It felt safe, sheltered, complete at the time. And my family did something that was very unusual at the time. They adopted seven kids, so from five different countries. And there was a choque cultural when that happened, a cultural clash. So my parents adopted seven children from five countries, and they each carried with them geopolitical trauma and um, challenges linked to those national contexts. For example, I had a brother from El Salvador that witnessed his father killed and came out of El Salvador during the time of the Salvadorian War, and we don't know all the things, but that was very impactful on his life. Um, I when my siblings came, they all took parasite medicine, and parasites came out of every orifice, um, and that was um, traumatic for them. And for my brother, he came up and went like this and thought it was hilarious because it had been something that he had lived with all his life, this kind of thing. My view of how the world was constructed began to crumble, but no one named it. And we went to a lot of different therapists, but none of them were thinking in terms of the ways space had influenced each of us. So, yeah, multiple clinicians worked with the family. None were aware of the siblings' national context or my own context. And the most interesting thing is I grew up in this, and it really shaped my interest in diversity, my interest and so when I sought out training programs, I saw ones that I thought would address that, but they were all very US centric. None of them really talked about diversity outside of of a US context. Very useful concepts that I could take and transfer, but so USC and so US centric in them. And I've talked to many diversity experts over the years. I had one of the leaders of my university's diversity program tell me that the exotic nature of international issues is distracting from the real work of multiculturalism, and really didn't want it to be. So there was a real um, disconnect, which of course I didn't believe in because didn't believe agree with because um, well, if you are living in California, you're going to work with Cambodians who were impacted uh, by by the Pol Pot regime, or if you're going to work, I could do country after country. A therapist is going to interact with people from outside of the United States, and it would be helpful for them to know a little bit about those cultural backgrounds and to be curious about those and to have an awareness of how nationality shapes what they do and what they don't do. Anyway, okay. So I've enjoyed again reading yours, but think about this. Continue to think about this. What does your map reveal? What were the racial, class, and gender dynamics of the spaces you grew up in? Where did you have privilege? Where were you marginalized? Whose absence from your spaces was invisible to you until now, and or maybe you're in process? What acts of resistance or resilience did your geography cultivate in you? I was very curious about that for a number of you. It's like I saw resistance and I wondered where that originated from, where that strength come from. And then how might your spatial history shape what you see and miss in the therapy room? What interventions might you think about using that you maybe need to think through a little bit more? So yeah, implications for practice, routinely ask about space and place, try to contextualize within structural power. Uh, do this process for yourself, continue to think about it, and then I think that'll help you be in a better position to help the folks that you work with, the families, the individuals, the couples that you work with to be mindful of that. And then recognize and amplify resistance. Before pathologizing behavior, ask, could this be resistance? And how might we name and build on the resistance already present in the family? Yeah, think about that. How's your geography shaped the therapist you are becoming? And then think about one thing from today that challenges or deepens your understanding of yourself as a cultural being. And I hope that there are many. Thank you very much.